Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and do some more buckshot testing, and today we've got another new shell that we haven't tested on the channel yet, and this is definitely going to be a pretty interesting combination to see if this particular load can give us a decent or halfway usable result. We've struggled with this testing before with these particular type of shells and getting them to perform well, so I don't know. We never tried these. Maybe they might be the magical ones that perform well through everything, but we're going to find out what happens either way. But as for the shells I brought out here today, I got out some of the Remington Express buckshot loads, but these ones are the 20 gauge 2 3/4 inch 20 pellet load of 3 buck. Surprisingly enough, there is no box claimed velocity on here. I will look it up and see if I can find it, and if I do, I'll pop it up over here on the screen. Either way, some of these new Remington Express buckshot loads have been rather surprising. However, if you've been following along with our buckshot testing, you know the struggles that we've seen with 20 gauge buck loads. We've only gotten 2, maybe 3 of them to pattern halfway decently at all, and generally they're just pretty terrible across the board. So with these, I will show you here, maybe you guys might be able to read, but right over here on the corner it specifically says that these can be fired through any choke, but a full choke will give the best results. That's not always the case, but we're going to go off of that for today's test since that is what they're claiming. So as for the setup we're going to run them through, I brought out the Stevens 301 20 gauge, got a 26-inch barrel, and I threw in a regular old flush full choke. This particular full choke measures to a 590 constriction, so very much the normal, but I have to say this in every video because inevitably 20 gauge buckshot brings all the people out of the woodwork somehow or another. But when it comes to 20 gauge buckshot, I personally have never in any of my testing seen a good pattern from any shell through less than a full choke constriction. And again, the box does claim best results through a full choke. That's not always exactly the case, especially with aftermarket chokes and stuff like that, but that's where we're going to start and we'll see what happens. More than likely, if I had to guess right now, we're going to need to move into a little bit tighter of a choke constriction. Now, of course, your results may vary. You may find these work great through an improved cylinder choke, but in my setup, that's probably not going to be the case. So for today, we're going to start with what the box says we should be using, and we'll see what happens, and we can move from there based on what kind of a pattern we get. But as for today's test, everything is set up the same as usual. I've got the big sheet of paper at 40 yards, the chronograph so we can get our velocity, and the templates that we can lay up over our results. So let's get you guys a view of that target and see if the Remington 20 gauge buckshot loads are halfway decent through what they're claiming we should be using in that full choke. I don't know if we're going to see something good or not, but let's take our shot and just see where we're at. Alright, so that shell gave us 1170 through the chrono. Again, if I can find the box claim online somewhere, I'll pop it up on the screen here. But that's probably pretty realistic for these shells overall. 2 3/4 inch, 3 buck load. I'm perfectly fine with that, just shy of 1200 feet per second. So I'd say we're looking okay for a velocity up here. But did they actually pattern well down there at 40 through a full choke or not? Let's go check it out and see. Alright, so now we're down here at our 40-yard paper, and this is what we got. And I gotta say, it's definitely pretty interesting for results here. Now, the white dot was my point of aim. The paper's 36 inches wide by about 44 inches tall. And we had 17 of the 20 pellets on the paper here, so we are missing 3 of them somewhere. I think our pattern might have been just a touch high, maybe, considering we don't really have any down there at the bottom, but we do up here at the top. I did measure both width and height on the 17 pellets we do see here, and at 40 yards, we have 31 inches wide by 23 inches tall. And I gotta say, although this is not what I would call a great buckshot pattern, it's actually probably the best 20 gauge buckshot pattern that we've seen from any of the shells we've tested through that flush full choke. We've definitely had 1 or 2 patterns that did perform better than what we see here, but that was through an extra full choke or a turkey choke of some description. But for them being through a full choke, this is not horrible based on what we have previously seen. So this might actually be a usable pattern the way it is, which is not something we typically see through most 20 gauge buckshot shells from a full choke or less. So let's throw a couple templates up, and that'll give us a little better idea of how it actually performed than just this blank sheet of paper. So first up here is our 10-inch circle, and at 40 yards, we had 5 pellets within there, which for a 20 gauge load isn't horrible. Now I did put that template in the hottest area of the pattern. If I moved it up a little bit to be dead center in the pattern, we would lose a couple of those and go down to 3 or maybe 4 pellets. But I believe that hottest area of the pattern is right here where I have that template, which is probably our core. So call it 5 pellets through there. It's gonna get the job done for what you would want to use these shells for. It's not the most even core. We don't have the most pellets in there. There is a void right down through the middle there and just off to the right. So not perfect, but not completely unusable either. So let's throw a few animal templates up and see how it would look if you took this combo out there on a hunt. So first up here is our deer template, and when we line it up with roughly where our point of aim was versus where our pattern actually hit down here, we would have had at least 9 pellets hit the deer, several of which are right through the heart or lung area right there around that white dot. So would it have been a dead deer? Yes, it would have been, but you can see how you pretty much just covered the deer in random pellets rather than have a nice central condensed pattern right through your vitals. So for a moving target, that might not be too bad, but for a stationary target, it's definitely not the best or the most ideal combo. But again, for a 20 gauge buckshot load, that is not the worst we've seen by any means. I think we can, or at least I hope we can get better through a different choke, but at least a full choke would seem to be good enough. But let's swap over to the hog template, which will give us an idea of how it looks on a little smaller of an animal, a little closer to a coyote size or something like that. And that might be a little bit more applicable for this particular shell and choke combination. Okay, and here's that hog template, and for those of you hog hunters, it would still be good enough to do the job. You've got enough of them right through the vitals there to get the job done, but he might still run a little ways on you with that kind of a pattern. Either way, this gives us a little better idea of what it looks like on a coyote-sized animal. They would be just a touch smaller than this hog template is, and you would still have a good enough 40-yard pattern to get the job done on those guys as well, especially if they're moving or on the run. It's going to give you a little more leeway to work with while still hitting him with at least 3 or 4 pellets. So it might be a little bit more applicable to those type of situations with how broad the pattern is. So overall here today, for a buffered load that doesn't have a wad or anything like that, it actually did okay for a 20 gauge buckshot load through a full choke. Again, I've got a few other chokes in mind that I think we can run these through and get a little better pattern out of them, but this could have been way worse, especially for a Remington shell. At least it is technically usable enough out to 40 yards to get the job done, but I would definitely want better out of it before I took it out on a hunt personally. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about that result right there? I think we pretty well covered it at this point. You can kind of see what it is right there on the paper. It's not going to be anything special, but it would technically be good enough. But for a 20 gauge buck load through a full choke, that's not the worst we've seen by a long shot. So I've got a few chokes in mind that I think I want to run these through that are a little bit tighter constriction, and we'll see what happens. Maybe a 585 to 580 choke range might be the ticket, and we might actually have a pretty decent performing combination for both a 20 gauge buck load and a Remington shell at that. We're just gonna have to try them through some more chokes and see what we can get. But leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected out of this combo? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of the Remington 20 gauge buckshot loads? And if so, what kind of results have you seen from them? Is that a pattern or combo you would hunt with? Or would you still just prefer a 12 gauge or have that tightened down quite a bit more? And what other chokes do you guys want to see us run those shells through that you think might perform? I don't think it's going to be anything less constriction than a full choke, but if there's something you guys want to see, then let me know down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All that information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.